Hello, hello, my beautiful friends and colleagues. It's Izabela Lundberg here, and I am on the roll with the Rollis. I could not resist not to say that. HR Maximizer fellow, live with Rollis, that is actually HR disruptor, and he's actually equipped to retool and disrupt and innovate HR. And you guys know we needed that yesterday. We needed it even a few years back. And
Yeah,
now we get a chance to have that happening. How are you, Rollis?
I'm fantastic. I'm even better now that I'm here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Fun continues. We had a fun earlier this week on Tuesday, I believe.
Yeah,
And now we have a chance to really look at a little bit things from different lens.
yeah.
So more about why we really have to think about it. What is the best? That best performer, best talent, best company, and why you have to aim for the best. Do you mind sharing before we dive into all of that? How did you even get in HR? And it's very obviously disrupted, a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of crazy stuff happening right now, not only due to COVID, right?
Right,
So, do
right.
you mind giving us a little bit about your background prior deep diving into HR, spicy things that are happening right now on national and global scale?
Well, you may not know this. I came out the womb recruiting, actually. No, I'm just kidding.
Ooh.
no, no. I actually, as far as my first career, it was more. I was more of a salesperson. I did lot of selling, and it just my career kind of found its way eventually towards recruiting. I actually used to my first sales job was actually selling cars.
Ooh, so you
Yeah.
were that salesman that everybody were running from the parking lot
No,
back in the
I was one of the
days?
good guys. I was one of the good guys. No, in
I'm
fact,
teasing.
even when I was selling, I had some issues with it. I actually listen. I'm not going to throw any shade on those who sell cars. So much love and respect. But I did have some struggles with some of the practices back in the business. This is the mid '90s. It's much
Wow.
more advanced now. But at the
Yes.
time, there were some struggles with my inner. I had inner struggles from an integrity standpoint with some of the things that were done. Now, fortunately, I didn't sell used cars generally. I sold new cars, and they were Hondas. It was a product I thoroughly believed in. So I didn't have some of those struggles that some may have if they're selling perhaps some used cars that maybe may not be working as well as it should be working, and they're selling as if it's great. So I didn't have some of those, but there were some things, and so I eventually moved out of that business and sold other things. But then eventually I became a stockbroker and sold financial service products and instruments.
Mm.
And then that's my last career before I actually moved over to being a recruiter.
And I knew there was a story behind it, and I really wanted for you to tell. And I love how much you actually, for hardest thing for everybody actually to do is the sales. And I love that you said the salesman and sales car mentality never worked for you, and you found a better way to do that because that doesn't even fit with your personality, to be honest. So it's like you can't change your behavior, your character, and your core who you are. I mean, you can
Right.
adjust somewhat, but in essence, it's like that is not you. So I'm glad did you pivot? Did you figure it out? And I'm curious, what happened with stock brokerage that really prompts you to go in HR world? Obviously, a lot of changes, right?
That was, it was more financial than anything because the time period was there was the bubble that there was a technology bubble, and I'm kind of
Yeah.
dating myself here a little bit, but I was in the business from 1996 until 2004. And if those of you who are watching lived during that time, there was a huge technology bust, and it brought the whole market down. And at the time, I was paid off assets under management. So you get paid a percentage based off of how much assets you have under management. And so all of a sudden, your assets, that is the value of the stocks and things that you have, if they're devalued by 50%, guess what happens to your income?
The valuation goes down as
It
well.
goes down by 50% too. And
Wow.
so, we had some family meetings inside the house. And by the way, when I say family meetings, I mean me and my wife. And
Mhm.
then when I say that we needed to look at some other alternatives, that suggestion was given by my wife. And I listened. And she has a good point there. She says maybe I want to look at some other industries. Look at some other things that are out there. So you know what, you had a good point there. Let me take a look. And then so I started applying for a couple of jobs, and one that really caught my attention was medical recruiting. And there was a company that hired me and trained me, even though I didn't know anything about. I knew something, but not a lot about recruiting. I certainly
Yes.
knew nothing about medical procedures or anything like that. Never stepped foot in a hospital other than maybe to visit somebody, but certainly not work there. So they trained me up. On how to be a good recruiter. Became one of their top recruiters within a relatively short period of time. They promoted me to manager and director, and I ended up managing a team. And we broke some records. Had some fun. Had an awesome team. Love that team over there. And then eventually started my own business in recruitment.
Wow, what amazing epic journey. And I think again highlights is always how you pivot, how you recognize some things that are going on in your
Yeah.
personal level, how they're affecting you professionally, and then how you walk the talk. Instead of just telling people, you will look at the things from different perspective. You already did that, and you know what that journey looks like. You've been there, you've done that multiple
Yeah.
times, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting how you may have some experiences. Those who are watching, you may have certain experiences now that aren't enjoyable for you. Maybe they're a struggle, whatever the case is. But you just don't know how those experiences were going to help you or serve you in the future.
Yes.
That was there's so many things that I experienced back then, books I read, things of that nature, that had I not gone through those things and read those books and did those things, I would have had a much more limited perspective now. So it expanded my perspective. So those even though some of those things were humbling, they weren't very enjoyable. There were lots of things that were negative things associated with those experiences. They actually served me well today. So I'm thankful for that.
Brilliant. And they see everything is like a building block, right? Everything kind of builds from that. And you mentioned books. Do you mind sharing with the audience what books really made the major impact and transformation on you and your
Oh
way of
wow.
thinking, your mindset, as well as obviously through your career, through your work, if you don't mind?
There's
Anything on top of
so
your mind?
many. Oh wow. Okay, we could talk about this. So many. Think and
It's
Grow
okay.
Rich.
Uh-huh.
7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Um,
Yes.
the Tom Hopkins books on sales. Now, some of that stuff doesn't serve me as well today. Like, for instance, the Tom Hopkins books back then, there's certain things that we just take for granted that we say. A lot of that stuff came
Yes.
from his books back then. I'll give you one simple one. For instance, the term contract. He says, don't use the word contract, use the word agreement. So
I love that.
even to this day, I use that. I don't say, "Hey, can we make sure we get the contract signed?" Let's talk about the agreement. You see, it's a common vernacular today, but back in the '80s, it wasn't that common. And in the '90s, when I was reading it, that was something it taught me, that use softer language for things. Is there a better way of saying what you normally say that makes it more palatable to the other party? And so,
Yeah.
agreement sounds a lot better than contract.
Yes, doesn't sound scary. And also, it is something that I also have a saying. So it's already takes away the half of the walls and barriers, and rest of it is the trust, right? That allowed us to connect better. And everything that we're doing, and in part of the industries and businesses we're touching, we're always dealing with people, or the people
Yeah.
industries in a way, right?
Yeah, exactly. In the financial business, there was a book called The Richest Man in Babylon. It's a relatively short book. You familiar with that one?
Yes, I read it. I have it. Yes.
Yeah. So I got introduced to that because I was in the financial services business. There's the Ultimate Sales Machine. That's another one. It's a sales related book. There's tons of books back then reading those books even way back then served me today. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I can't tell you how many times I've read that book, and some of those same principles in there. Seeking first to understand, building win-win relationships. Just and the list goes on and on with different concepts and principles that were brought out in that particular book that still serve me well in my business now.
That is brilliant. And I'm so glad that you're also showing to the audience how it's important to really reflect back on the journey, right? And in every different stage of journey, as we start feeding consciously our mind with the right information and surrounding ourselves with the content that is propelling us forward, that is
Yes.
really helping us out to succeed, what was those little breadcrumbs, as we call it, on the journey to that led us to all that ultimate success. And thank you for sharing that, because obviously shifting from these very distinct financial industries and car sales and whatnot, it's a quite different. So now we're landing in the world of craziness of HR, right? Anybody who is part of it or needs to talk to HR, it's like there's always this tension and barrier and scary kind of thing, because that's where all the things happening that can go so incredibly right and so quickly incredibly wrong.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
do you mind sharing a little bit from what you've seen in your driver's seat, specifically in the last 10 or so years that you've been in the industry, and what prompts you to really start building your own company and work for yourself in that space, and how you're doing it different? Because I betcha you're going to tell me the main reason was you needed to innovate, disrupt, and change, and that
Yes.
allows you to do that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love this subject. So, and those who are watching, if they have questions about either from the candidate side or the employer side, I love both sides of the equation because I look at recruiting holistically.
Beautiful.
I don't look at it as thinking of things only from the employer's point of view or only from the candidate's point of view. I think that they all work together because we're all trying to make a match. As a recruiter, that my main goal is to find the right type of person that can fit that particular job that I'm working on. So I'm looking to make a match. And then the candidate's goal is to try and find a job that matches the best with not only their skill set, but what they're passionate about, what they get charged up about. And so they're looking for a match as well. So we're both ultimately looking for something very similar, if not the same. So we're aligned in that way, but
Yes.
but unfortunately, we're misaligned in maybe the ways we go about it, and so that's
Bring
where we
us.
yeah we try and work with employers to help them so that they can kind of be more in alignment with how these candidates are looking for a job, so that they can be more likely to make those connections.
Brilliant. And I love that, because holistically, I love, again, everything, because that's the way we learn. So if I, as a candidate, know what employer is looking, or me as an employer looking what I'm looking in candidate, it's that amazing perception that help us out to serve and show up and really be able to be that perfect person to take whatever the pain point is or company to the next level, to the next phase, right?
Absolutely, and so there because companies are trying to work lean, especially in some of the industries that are suffering more than others. They're trying to work as lean as possible, which means that they're understaffed. That's actually a nice way of saying that in a lot of cases that they don't have enough staff or they don't have enough tools. It may be they have enough
Or do it
staff.
the highest priority, highest value, and everything else is like put on hold or
Yeah,
stopped doing, because we're not going to waste the time on things that it's maybe good to have, or they're optional, or they're not as high priority, frankly, right?
exactly, exactly. And then you being a leadership expert, you know that a lot of times what the employees will do is heavily dependent on what's important to the leaders. So whatever
Yes.
the leaders are putting emphasis on, that's what the recruitment department and the HR is going to put emphasis on. So one of the things that I think gets overlooked very easily, even by leaders as well as those in HR, is what about all those candidates who apply that don't get an answer because they weren't a fit for that particular position that they applied for? What happens to all those people? That's a tremendous branding opportunity, but
Yes.
then it can also be a detriment if it's not handled correctly. And that's I see that happens a lot right now. You have a lot of people who they feel like these ATSs are like a black hole. And when I say ATS, not to use jargon for those who aren't familiar, it's an applicant tracking system. So whenever you go see a job online somewhere and you apply for a job, your information is going into a software system. And that software system is where a lot of people feel like it's a black hole because they never hear back. And when they do hear back, maybe it's just something letting them know that the job got filled, and so you weren't hired. So that's kind of a major disconnect, and it's just not a great way to communicate with candidates. Companies are starting to realize that, and they're starting to make adjustments. But I can tell you that usually when companies make those type of adjustments, it's because they're being affected. They're seeing certain things that are happening. Maybe they're not getting as many candidates coming in. There's some issues that are causing that. But instead of waiting for those issues to happen, this is a tremendous branding opportunity to be holistic in our recruiting and to make sure that we are treating those candidates who may not have been a fit for that particular job they applied for, but they could be an awesome, awesome employee for our organization, maybe in another role.
Yes. And being able to really innovatively and creatively to think and not being pigeonholed and just look at from one perspective, but also understand and know what the needs of whole department or different division of organizations are, even in the different cities.
Yeah.
And that requires someone who is absolutely dedicated in their leadership position and really wants to serve and help their peers and their colleagues, as well as rest of the C-suites and executives that are struggling, right? Because I hear so many times, board leadership, the job boards changed so much. Leaders were not in alignment, now they want this, or they thought about this, or they're not happy, their nomenclature and their language is not matched with the language what is being expected, so that's where's the disconnect. But in reality, you can actually pass some phenomenal candidates just because you are not looking also things from their perspective and being open to hear them out.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a post yesterday, late last night. I had inspiration. I watched an interview of Tom Brady. Those of you who don't watch football, they just won the Super Bowl. His team, it was Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He had been with another team, the New England Patriots, for about 20 years. And he's the only quarterback that has won 7 Super Bowls with his team. So anyway, they were interviewing him about his draft story. Now, if you look if you look at his draft story, he was the 199th pick in the draft. So they felt that 198 players were better than Tom Brady. Out of those 198 players, probably none of them hardly still play in the league. Tom Brady is definitely the only quarterback that's still playing in the league from that draft class, and no one received anywhere near the accolades or success that he did. None of them went to a Super Bowl. Maybe one of them possibly went to a Super Bowl, but none of them won a Super Bowl. And by far, he was the most successful. But guess what they said about him when he was being drafted?
Too skinny and whatever.
Yeah.
They had
you must have seen it. Yeah, exactly. You must have seen it. He's too skinny. He's too slow. He's not able to avoid the rush. He's not able to improvise. All these different things. So on paper, he just did not look strong. All the experts just did not think he was going to be the right fit. The Patriots didn't even really know that he was going to right fit. They already had 3 quarterbacks, but they went ahead and bring him on anyway because they saw some potential, and they're bringing him on. The rest of the story is written. In fact, there's still more that's unwritten. But he goes on to go to 10 Super Bowls and won 7 of them, which is amazing. And he has great feedback from all of his teammates he's worked with. At least any ones I've heard from, they've all had great things to say about him. So here is a wonderful, wonderful employee, a top performing employee that was overlooked by virtually all the teams.
By the standards and the lens and algorithms and the official stuff and criteria that is technical and disconnects from that human factor. And I'm so glad you brought this example, because I was just earlier talking about exactly the same thing, but in a different setup. And it was so interesting too, how many all-star, the best talent as a result, because of somebody's insecurity, or not knowing their job and process of recruiting and knowing how to connect and ask right questions, consider their answers actually to be the really thought-provoking and deep and whatnot, we just simply skew over. And this has been broken for so long. And right now, if we're not fixing it, then we don't know when we're going to fix it, because we're going to die. We're going to bleed out, basically, with everything that is going on. And if you don't mind, I just want to bring this point. Right now, we're dealing with the highest in a modern time, because we have a data and technology to track that. The lowest engagement and the lowest performance. And that kind of really ties together. So do you mind sharing why? Why do you see is the case from your perspective?
That's a very good question. I don't know if this will shed enough light on it, but I don't want to just go back to that Tom Brady story for a second.
Please.
His dad, Tom Brady Sr., he says the one thing that they overlooked in his son was heart. They underestimated
with the heart.
Yeah, his heart. And so
Yes.
I think that has some correlation or some bearing on what we're talking about, which
Yes.
is, you know, has that person's spirit been broken where their heart is no longer in it? That is definitely going to affect their engagement. That's going to affect, how they feel about the job and their performance on the job. So I think that probably plays into it. And the spirit may have been broken. And when I say spirit, I mean just their overall demeanor and their passion for the job. I'm wondering if possibly some of that could have been from the fact that we're in the midst of a pandemic. That certainly could be part of it. It could be the effects from that. But then it could also be their leadership, their management, really not paying enough attention to them personally and making them feel personally important. And that also can take some of your spirit away. I know that I had that issue with a former company to where I had lost my drive and my heart. I love my team and everything, but I had lost a lot for the company because of some of the things that the leadership was the direction they wanted to take the company. And so I think that also plays into it as well. One of the things I know that happened really early in the pandemic, at least in the healthcare market, I'm sure it probably happened in other industries, is that there was less communication initially because they didn't know
Yes.
quite how to handle it.
Yes.
Is that on my end? I'm not sure why. Why is that even happening? I apologize for that.
No, it's okay.
That's the beauty of live. I don't know how to stop it. Let's see here. I'm gonna figure something else here.
No problem.
Is it still going? It's still going, right?
I don't hear anything. I don't see. We're
Okay,
good.
good.
We're
Yeah,
fine.
it's like ringing in my ears like crazy, like there's someone's trying to call in. Uh, so what was I even talking about?
It's okay. It's really good pivot actually for Tony, for the Brady story, and then how he's actually disconnected and how you also experience disconnect from such a high performer, talented individual, but environment wasn't really conducive and wasn't supportive and wasn't not inspirational for you to constantly bring the A game, and as a result, you burned out and you left.
Yeah.
Very common practice, too often happening, too often that we should not be any more accepting as is okay and as is normal, and to deal with that. And we're really right now again in pandemic of low performance and disconnect and disengagement. And I have to say, it doesn't have to do with virtual stuff, based on my background and based on what I'm seeing that is going on. And I really want us to kind of deep dive a little bit into that. Mainly, and I will tell you why I see this, is because pandemic and economy were just unveiling what was already not functional, right?
Oh
What was
yes.
not
Oh,
effective.
that
They
is so
just
true.
actually everything that we swept on the rug, everything that we thought that doesn't matter, we are like throwing in gazillions of money on technology. Eventually, we were working to improve a little bit of a process, but
Right.
people were always on the back burner because we were like, yeah, we always can get some more. We'll plaster, we'll try. If it doesn't work, we'll try again. We'll get something else. We're going to go for younger people. We're going to go for people that we can mold to our culture so they can do everything we want, how we want it. And that actually completely shifted to the point that deteriorated the quality of the culture performance even before pandemic. And now with this, because it's so overwhelming, you have so many issues on top of it, right? And the reason I just want to quickly throw this out for you, and you tell me how this translates in your world. The 4 points that keep CEOs awake at night, and I'm sure it's the same thing with football, with Brady, with everybody. It's like on the end of the day, we all work hard to go to championship, and everybody wants to win championship.
Right.
If we're not the best in our niche, in our industry, then it's not working. And why is not working? Why we cannot compete on that level? What we're missing out? And always starts with the top level leadership. You were spot on. The 4 things that it's absolutely either you're solo entrepreneur or small business owner or Fortune 500 company. Growth is number 1 right now, that everybody's freaking out and stressing out about it. Uncertainty that we're dealing with that we absolutely cannot predict. Doesn't matter who you are and how smart people around you, you have to really be able to deal with that uncertainty and ambiguity that brings to the table. Morale is all-time low.
Yes.
And then issues around working from home. So let's look at that from the recruiting and bringing the best out of the people with all these 4 elements, if you don't mind, because We can't deny them. They're here. They're facts. And how this plays out to really then extract and motivate and bring the players that really wanted to give you the loyalty, commitment, and the best performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, just kind of to parlay on what you're saying here, depending on where they are, like which one of those points is more important to that person, you want to speak to that person where they are.
Yes.
See, right now, a lot of times when jobs are being advertised, they're just taking a job description and copying and pasting that onto the applicant tracking system, and then they're wanting people to apply. The problem with that is they're not speaking to them where they are. What if their issue is at their place of employment, they're having to work from home and they don't feel like they're getting the support or the communication that they need, the level of support that they need from their organization, and they're frustrated. Well, what's not going to be in most job descriptions is speaking to that. Listen, we're actually a company that's going to support you. We're going to make sure you have the proper work environment. You're going to have lots of communication from our leaders. In fact, here's a short 1-minute video from your potential boss, and she's going to talk about what your job's going to be like. Oh, here's another video we have that shows a couple of your teammates, your potential teammates, and what they think about the job, and the good and the bad. What and they're going to explain what the situation is. Those things like that build trust, and they also give a better idea of what's going on in that organization. That's going to attract those candidates more so than just pasting a job description that may have been written 5 years ago, that probably half of the things in the description aren't even appropriate or not even done in the job anymore.
Yes.
How many times have we seen that? And then they may have, like for instance, here's what's done in nurses. I'm sure it's done in a lot of other situations too. But a nurse, there may be 10 departments in the hospital. And every time the recruiter posts a job for a nurse, they're posting the same job description for all 10 departments. That can't be the case. They work totally different. A nurse who meets with who works in the maternal child or the OB in labor and delivery, they're working with sometimes premature babies or babies. They're working with mothers a lot, and so that's totally different from let's say a group that works with mostly, let's say, ortho joint. So they're working more perhaps with older population. Very few of them are, relatively few of them will be small children. Maybe they're working with a mostly adult population. So there's just a number of things that are different from one department to the next, and just take one job description and paste it across all 10 departments. You're not really connecting with your audience with that. That's just one small example. So I would say speak to them where they are. Be more descriptive about what that job entails currently, not what it was 5 years ago. Being true to what the environment is really like in that organization. Don't try and sugarcoat it. It doesn't help you at all to try and sugarcoat it.
Yes.
Because if you get them to come for that first interview and they find out they catch wind of what's really going on, then all of a sudden now they're ghosting you. You don't hear back from them. And then let's say you do convince them to take the job, they're not going to be there very long. So you're just wasting everybody's time. So being more transparent, I think, is also another issue. If you got problems, if you have issues, as best as you can, try and communicate those issues. Try and be be accepting. This is who we are right now. This is not where we want to be. That's why we need you, Izabela. We need you on the team. Right now we're having to work some overtime. We're having to do some extra things we normally wouldn't do. But that's because we don't have someone like you. But we feel like if we have someone like you, that's what's really going to help us grow. So being more honest in a conversation like that versus acting like nothing is wrong, everything's perfect here, and then you come in and say, wait a second, this is not what I signed up for. Y'all didn't say I had to work all this overtime. You didn't say I was going to have my own setup in my house.
Yes, or the shifts or the schedule or the time off and the weekends, etc. The things that are important for quality time and whatnot. And even if people choose to sacrifice and wanted to sacrifice, I just said, knowing when you're walking in what will be the worst scenario, so that anything else, they know what to prepare mentally for. Nobody likes surprises, specifically. I mean, almost a phenomenal, Powerball winning or whatever, but definitely not negative surprises. And you spot on. One thing, Rollis, that just when you shared this jumped is also the fact that recruiting skill sets. It's a different recruiting right now in the last few years than in prior years. And very different dialogue and relationship building and connection.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I don't see much of that changing also. And in fact that we still have over 90 to 95% of the boards not updating the all positions, that a lot of them are done through internal channel or different ways of sourcing. Unless you're part of those channel, and I call it underground of recruiting, you don't have no idea what else is going on unless you have very good relationship with organizations and they directly reach out to you and say, hey, we heard you speak, we heard your work, we heard you, recommended your name through X, Y, and Z. Are you interested? And that doesn't happen as often as people think it does.
Right.
So do you mind sharing a little bit about those two contrasts and different ways of discovering great positions and bringing the top talent to organization?
Yeah, I mean, you've covered on so many. We could literally spend hours talking about that, but I'm just going to try and boil it down. One of the things that I'm noticing is that with the things like AI that's already starting to be used, so chatbots, they can actually have a decent conversation with someone. Not on a very deep level, but they can have a conversation with someone without any interaction from the recruiter. So if a recruiter is used to not really having conversations with people, they like to just basically just email and maybe possibly text, but most cases they don't want to do that because they don't want to give out their own mobile phone number.
Yes.
But let's say they do give out their number and they want to have a text conversation. Well, AI can do that. What's different from what you're offering that AI can't do? See, the way that recruiters will be able to differentiate themselves is to be able to communicate in a more human way. Let's say it is email or text, but definitely more in a human way. But I would also say connecting through things like Zoom and through the phone.
Yes.
AI technology is many years away from being able to have a meaningful conversation on the phone or on a Zoom with a candidate looking face to face with that candidate. So I think this is an opportunity where recruiters, by building more of a human connection with their candidates, can start to differentiate themselves to the point that they're going to be one of those needed resources that those companies can't let go. I was just talking with someone on a Zoom just earlier today, and I was just giving an example. I'm just going to just give a broad example. Let's say there's 100,000 recruiters in healthcare, for example. Well, what if they figure out with AI, for example, and with other technologies such as the texting platforms and all that kind of stuff, what if they figure out they really only need 60,000 recruiters? What happens to those 40,000 recruiters? See, those 40,000 are going to be competing for those same 60,000 jobs. That's a losing scenario. We've seen that happen in a lot of other industries, like with cashiers, the bank industry, all those. We're used to. It was a big thing a long time ago, but we're used to ATM machines. That they bucked that thing for a while. To have a computer that handles your money, that's crazy. But that's second nature now. They thought it was crazy to have self-checkout.
Yeah,
that's normal. How many of us on this call right now who are watching? Most of them have all used self-checkout at some point. It's not shocking anymore. So at some point, it's not going to be shocking for someone to apply for a job and have a full conversation with a chatbot without the need for a recruiter unless they have specific humanistic type questions, right? Like describe for me what's the culture like there. Describe for me what my work environment's going to be there. What are provisions for this? There's some certain humanistic connection type things that a AI chatbot, we're just too many years away from that. Yeah. So going back to your point, I think that to differentiate themselves, companies and recruiters are going to want to focus more on the human aspect, which differentiates them from AI. Because at some point, people are going to be in fact, they did some studies not long ago that the satisfaction rate for speaking to an AI is actually higher than the recruiters. Not because the conversation is better, but because of the accessibility. If someone applies for a job, they get immediate response of an AI and they can have an immediate conversation. Whereas a recruiter, they may not ever get a chance to speak with that recruiter, and if they do, it could be several weeks later when they may not even be interested in the job anymore.
Very,
So,
very true.
yeah. So I think that right now, and this is one thing I'm definitely preaching to recruiters, is make yourself invaluable to your organization by making those human connections. That is something that's going to be very difficult for a company to emulate through AI at this point. But this other stuff like texting people back and emailing them back, very simple answers to questions and all that, and processing applications, those are things that computers can do. That technology is already here. It's just a matter of them using it more.
That is great, and I'm glad you said that, specifically as we're again having the high volume, and some companies are more popular than the others, and everybody at least are driving and going towards the companies that are larger, that are bigger, that have the money, that have actually job positions truly to fill. That it's not just being part of their queue that may or may not work out, or their funnel 3, 6, or 12 months down the road. And the worst thing is, again, not having the clean housekeeping, I call it, which is truly recruiting for jobs that are available right now. Right? And that is where the frustration comes in. And I can tell you lists and lists of companies that are doing that. And I'm just like, I am a lower, and my excitement and drive and respect for them just going lower and lower, because guess what? If you have the money, you have the resources, you have a phenomenal technology, you have a great brand. That brand actually is good at the moment. But then I also pay attention to Glassdoor. I'm seeing the comments of current employees and past employees and rating of CEOs. And that tells me very, very different picture. And when I bring some of those stuff out, and when specifically for leadership roles, or specifically, in area, it's like, do you even have a pulse what's going on in your own organization? And if you guys are not on top of the game, how then you as a recruiter will be able to deliver things when they don't have no idea what's priority today?
Yeah, absolutely. So you made me think of something that I've also told folks in the past, and I would challenge anybody who's watching this to do this, is if you're having any issues with recruiting, which is most organizations for certain types of positions, I invite you to go on your mobile phone right now and look for a job at your own company. Go through the complete application process on your own phone for your company. Tell me what that experience is like. How long did it take you? See, if it's taking them more than several minutes, there's a problem. And in a lot of cases, there's quite a few companies you can't even access their career site on a mobile phone. You have to go to a desktop. Those are killers in terms of getting the best candidates out there.
And they also having glitches, and then we can go on and on what's wrong. Right. And again, guys, this doesn't have nothing to do with pandemic and economy. It has to do with being prioritizing right things and being on top of your game and knowing what are you doing. And this from the leadership standpoint, I know that a lot of positions are being shaved off. I know that organizational chart looks very different. I know that there will be fast and furious hiring, hopefully starting next year. This year is, again, in a way, for so many companies, survival or maintenance, and hopefully some internal way of reconstruction and structuring. And the ones that are truly hiring, I really do hope that they're taking the pain from the candidates seriously, because it's just unfortunate to treat people this way. And words gets out, guys. And as a result, guess what? As somebody even loved your product and services, now with competition, with everything else, they're going to go elsewhere. And social media, they're going to tell everybody in their circle of influence about the bad experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're biting yourself in the foot or somewhere else by doing that, over and over, and ignoring the realities that are right now facing you.
As much as we hear about the term branding, you've got organizational branding, you have employer branding, you got personal branding. Well, every time a candidate, whether you hire them or not, comes in contact with your organization, that's a branding opportunity, positive or negative. And so you mentioned about how it can be very negative, but there's a lot of folks who apply for a job, they never get hired. They have an opportunity to actually have a positive branding experience. What if that person applies and they were treated with respect by actually getting a prompt response to their application, not just some automated thing, but someone actually looked at their application. You know what? Thank you for applying. looks like you're not going to be a fit for this particular one. I do notice you have X kind of experience. Sometimes we do have positions available in that particular field or that particular role. Would you like us to contact you with that? Sure. Yeah, great. That person's going to have a great view of that company because they were actually treated like a human being. They were interacted with, they were given that respect versus them applying and they never hear back. I remember one time I applied for this one job at a very large bank at the time. I heard back like 4 or 5 months later, I guess when they were cleaning out their applicant tracking system to let me know that the job had been filled. Well, I mean, I had already found a job 5, 6 months later. I mean, seriously. So I think, like you said earlier about the housekeeping, and I know these folks are understaffed. A lot of these recruiting and HR departments are understaffed. They're trying to do what they can. They do the best they can. But at the same time, just let's be cognizant. Let's at least be aware that these are branding opportunities, positive or negative. These are potential buyers or users of our service. And if they aren't potential buyers or users of our service, they certainly can influence someone else to buy or not buy that product or service. Mm-hmm. So in any case, we can use this branding experience in a positive or a negative way. And I certainly expect and have confidence everyone who's watching this wants to make it positive. So how do we fix that?
Yes. How do we fix that, Rollis? That is the big question, because all the great people are going elsewhere, or they're doing the same thing like you and I are doing, starting our own companies, trying to recruit and also work with a better quality talent that we've behind that are good alignment with our own culture and our own vision, and then going after different clients that we know that we can serve, right?
Because, yeah, absolutely.
So do you mind sharing a little bit about that experience and how people actually work with you these days and how you're helping them out to actually survive and thrive in these challenging times in the healthcare space?
I appreciate that. Over the past year, we as a company and myself have worked more on kind of branding and putting ourselves out there as to what we do and just being a little bit better at explaining it, what we do. And starting to engage leadership to get involved, because once you have leadership involved in improving things from a recruitment standpoint, then the needle starts to move. Yes. Until then, it's very difficult. It's even difficult for an HR executive to sell the idea, if you will, on certain initiatives or projects they have without being to communicate in a way that speaks the executive's language. Like, how does this affect the bottom line of the company? How does this affect revenue of the company if we make this change or we get this new? Because a lot of times HR is seen as a cost center, not as something that brings revenue.
And a problem center.
yeah, exactly. So, so those HR executives being able to explain those things. And so what I want to do, this would be my wish. I would love to be able to coach and work with talent acquisition leaders on ways they can equip themselves to be more, I guess, kind of re-equip themselves, their tool set. They already are great with connecting with people. I'm not going to necessarily teach them that part. But all the other stuff around it, which also includes selling their initiatives in the way that the HR executives will understand and appreciate and accept.
Yes.
Because if you try and speak from this is a great thing to do, or this is the right thing to do, well, so is buying that new piece of equipment we need to buy, or so is hiring let's say bring on that new sales rep that they knew, not new sales rep, but that sales rep that they know that they want to bring on, or in the case of a hospital, so is buying a new testing machine that's a piece of medical equipment. That's also good too. So how do you go up against that? Well, you've got to have some solid numbers. You've got to have some things that back up your argument as to why this is going to make the organization better. And that's where I see a lot of these initiatives are not getting approved. They're not able to get some of these things done because those conversations just aren't happening like they should. So I would love to be able to coach and help with people from that perspective. I get jazzed about that. But if we want to talk, if we want to talk about bells and whistles and technology and how to reach candidates and all that, I love having those discussions as well. But I also get jazzed about, how do we help these talent acquisition leaders who are great with connecting with people from a candidate standpoint? How do we re-equip them, kind of update their tool set, and then also get their initiatives approved? I would love to be able to help that. Anybody who wants to connect with me through my profile, I'm open to that.
I love it because you just, I love the way how creative you are, how actually well you know and understand the market and you see the pain points and you spot on as a part of the growth. Right now, leaders are looking so much on the KPIs and on the return of their investments and ROIs, as well as actually how also longevity of the team and the dynamics of the team with anticipation what is going on. So if we're having less different departments engage for whatever reasons or decline in certain procedures and performance, not just because of COVID, right? But we have a tremendous decrease right now with respiratory problems post-COVID, regardless, right? Or we're having more issues around whatever might be related. You are already anticipating knowing that you're staffing and you're going to have a very well-engined department in the hospital and you know where the revenue is going to be coming in as a result. Also the capacity, what's the maximum capacity and can you extend that and can you also improve? So just so many different ways, and those conversations and dialogue when hospital and leadership it's not in alignment, it's essential. And I had a chance to speak with a couple emergency doctors and their perspective was like, Izabela, we can't even agree on the same thing, you know, just in among our emergency department, let alone across the whole organization. That's the level of magnitude of issues that we're talking about. And the
Yeah.
problems are real.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it goes back to the whole communication thing, you know, and I know that this is something you believe strongly as well, is that the leadership, you know, having the, whatever vision they have, making sure that's being communicated properly throughout the organization so that we're all, you know, singing to the same tune. You know, music is beautiful, but if we all are singing to different tunes and if we're trying to do it at the same time, it's going to sound terrible. So,
Yes, or if we're competing and trying to override the others by being louder and being, as they say, squeaky wheels, gets
yeah,
more attention. It's like that doesn't work, guys, anymore. Again, you have
right.
to support it with evidence, with the facts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. So, I mean, one of the things I did notice too, that whenever the pandemic first started, I think companies are starting to improve on this more. But for a little while, their leadership was quiet. I know in healthcare, that first month or maybe the first 2 or 3 months, they were very quiet. I wanted to say part of it is because maybe they didn't know how long it was going to last. Maybe they
Mhm.
thought it was just a quick blip. But whenever there's silence and you're not giving your employees a story, guess what? They make their own story. And the stories they make are not nearly, they're going to be way worse than whatever story you were going to share with them. So trust me, go ahead and share your story because whatever they come up with, it's going to be worse.
Transparency is pivotal, and you spot on. One of the main reasons why people are actually disengaged and a low performer because they're so burned out. Because burned out not because they have necessarily too much more work. In some cases, that is so true because so many positions are being eliminated, so it's so much on their shoulder. But because of exactly of anxiety that is caused by stress, by unknown, by uncertainty, they're not sure if they're going to be kept, let go of, are they going to be asked to do more of the work? They're not sure. Nothing is guaranteed. And that is huge mistake because you are deteriorating your existing team that is already affected, that already you have a less members as it is. And everything you should be focusing on doing is to improve that and give them high morale. That's why morale is so insanely low. And
Yeah.
sometimes if we're even playing politically correct game, be human.
Yeah,
Show up and
absolutely.
show that you truly, genuinely care.
Yeah, I personally, Isabella, I've learned this in the past year. This is one thing that I've learned from the pandemic, is that being more empathetic and more kind is a way better way to go than thinking of things strictly from an academic or from a um, what do you call it, pragmatic type level.
Mhm.
Because let's say I send an email to a client or a potential client, and I'm not getting a response. And the first thing I'm gonna think it was like, why is this not important to them? Like, why are they answering my email? Not realizing that what if they have a family member that just they just found out they had COVID and they're taking care of that family member, or they got COVID, you know, or
Mhm.
they're worried about they're even going to lose their job because they just got some notification that they're going to have some layoffs. So I just learned during the past year that, you know what, instead of me just automatically going to the negative part,
Yes.
how can I show kindness in this? How can I show patience? How can I show empathy? I've learned how to do that better. I think that's one thing I've learned during this pandemic, because I can't tell you how many times I found out later and I just felt terrible. Oh, of course, that's why they didn't answer me, because of this.
Yeah, because we're taking too quickly, too personally, and too quickly to judge, quickly to create a story and scenario in our own heads, because we're wired and programmed to focus on negativity.
Yeah.
We're wired also to focus on because I'm disrespected and they don't care or whatever. And in reality, it's always so much more to the story if we create the space. But a lot of times people will not even tell you because they don't feel safe.
That's true.
And they don't even feel like they can tell you because they're afraid you're going to abuse that information. And that is the saddest part. That is the morale that I'm seeing right now, that is actually having people committing suicides. People, I can't tell you how many people I heard to say, I can't afford to quit the job, but I'm hoping to get fired. Isn't it the saddest piece, where how many of people that I know and of us are looking either for new clients, for new opportunities, or whatever scenario it is, right? On the other hand, you have people that are already in it, but they are dreading it because they feel like they're going to the death sentence every single day.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is unacceptable.
Yeah. So I think right now, and this is going to be, even after the pandemic is over. Let's say everybody's vaccinated and there's no more pandemic and it's over. Well, some of the after effects are going to last for a while, and so that's where I think the kindness and the empathy and the patience is going to go a long way, whether it's employees or
tolerance, understanding, support, genuine interest and care, no judgment. People gain weight, people lost weight, people aged, people are having anxiety and mental health problems that they cannot talk about anybody. They're afraid to use healthcare insurance because they're afraid they're going to get flagged, that they're now all of a sudden file antidepressants or whatever might be the case. I mean, guys, this is serious stuff. I'm sadly too much aware of all of these crazy dynamics, but it's like, what do you do? We can't be the forces that do it on our own. We need to have obviously right dialogue, right conversations. But if we're blind or trying to pretend that it's nothing happening,
right,
it's like, what do you do now with information when you know? That is the essence, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and you mentioned about afraid for getting flagged. One of the things that's come up, it's getting better, but the stigma that is associated with mental health, and I know you've been talking about this on your show recently as well, is this is a time period when people are having a lot of mental stress for what's going on, and removing the stigma from that to where they do feel comfortable, letting their employer know that they're not doing well, things aren't okay. I have a friend, her name is Kim LaMontagne. She wrote this book about it's okay to not be okay. And just, having that kind of environment of not being afraid to say, look, let me raise my hand here. I need help. We need that. We need to, and we also, as us who aren't having those same issues, how can we be more empathetic, more kind to those people who are having those issues, being more cognizant when they have these issues, and and let them know we do really care. This, because I know here in Southeast Texas, we might say, how are you doing? And
fine, thank you.
I'm doing fine. I'm doing great. How about you? Oh, I'm doing great. And then we move on. We're not actually, but we're not really saying we really want to know how you're doing, right? So what's a way that we can let the person know that I do actually want to know how you are doing? I am concerned.
Hey, Rollis, how I didn't see you in a while and talk to you. How are you dealing with all the craziness right now that's happening during the COVID? How is your family? You see the different intention.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not anymore just a question on autopilot, and it's not anymore answer on autopilot. When you shift, when you change different verbiage, and when you're intentional, for you, it's so hard not to just to say, fine, thank you, right? You're like, oh my gosh, she asked me about my family. She asked me how I'm doing now during this time. So it's like now it requires a different thinking process, and you can also answer just on the autopilot.
Right. Exactly. Yep. That's so true. So that's something I'm still working on real time. I mean, I'm definitely not mastered this, but this is something I have to even learn to remind myself on a daily basis. Don't go back in the old habit of just looking at things at face value. Look at things more like the iceberg. When you're looking at an iceberg, you're just seeing the tip. Most of that iceberg is below the water. So knowing that that's down there either I'm going to do one or two things. Either I'm going to understand that, okay, you know what, there's a lot I can't see here that's going on behind the scenes that I
Yeah.
want to be patient and be aware of. Or if is this person close enough to me, or a person that I want to actually find out what's below the ice, what's below the
Mhm.
water. You know, because we kind of have to, because there's some situations we just don't have the kind of relationship with that person where
Sure, but also you need to
we
know
don't
how
want to do
to
that.
contain. And if people pour their heart out and you're not able to listen openly and actively, and you're not able to take that next step in action, and just to say, "Oh, call this 1-800 number," versus "Let me pick up the phone and call this department. Let me assist you through this process." That is where we need to be able to remove the obstacles. We need to be more helping hands, no matter what position, title, and situation it might be in. Every single individual
Yeah.
can make a difference and impact on somebody else.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. There's things that people have said to you, and people have said to me, it could have been
Yeah.
5, 10, 15 years ago, and it made an impact where I can remember what they said. I may or may not be able to remember exactly what they said, but I remember how I felt. And so,
Yes.
conversely, these interactions we're having right now may be remembered for the next 5, 10, 15 years. What do we want them to remember us by? Do we want them to remember
Absolutely.
us from a positive standpoint? Of course, not the negative. So, how can I produce more of these positive experiences in others? Those are the kind of questions that I've been asking myself, and I've been trying to work on that.
And you're doing a phenomenal job, Rollis, and I want to provide some feedback because you're being very active. You're breaking into leveraging new tools and techniques, showing up on lives as a guest like on my show tonight, but also doing so many things like that on your own. And that's the beauty, you being visible. How many leaders are in the power and in position and capacity and capability to do so? I'm not saying they're not doing enough, but that they're not visible to their internal team, how they are going to be visible and transformational and impactful to their external stakeholders. If we're
Mm.
not taking care of our internal stakeholders, every single person from janitor to guy in garage who's opening the door for your elevator, whatever might be scenario, all the way to the penthouse and the top floor of the Empire Building, doesn't matter where you're at in any of those floors in between. Every single person matter. It's part of that super engine, of that super operation that makes everything works. And
Oh
that is
yeah,
where we need to start thinking and rethinking how we're interacting, how we're actually asking for help, how we're supporting one another.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, when we talk about attracting and retaining the best talent, the whole thought of attraction, and that I was taught this a long time ago in one of the books. I can't remember which book it was, but we basically attract who we are.
Yes.
So if we're attracting candidates that are not like what we want, we're attracting it's a reflection of who we are as an organization. So how do we fix that? Part of it may just be communicating it in the right way, being more transparent about what our company's like. Because if we're putting something else out there that's not really us, we could be attracting people in that way. But if we're really, really being transparent and really putting out there who we really are as an organization, if we're still attracting the wrong folks, that means there's some stuff we need to fix internally as an organization to attract more of what we want. And if we're going to attract more of what we want, we have to be more of what we want. So if we want to have more, let's say,
Elevate,
yeah.
yes.
It's difficult to attract something that you're not. To think that someone who you're going to bring in is going to come in and fix stuff, well, that may be flawed, because once you bring that other person in that's supposed to be this high performer, they're going to eventually emulate more of what your company is like. So you're going to take a high performer and actually make them a low performer. So in a lot of
Mhm.
cases, the company themselves has to take a hard look at themselves. Now, before you do all that, at least at the very beginning, be as transparent as you possibly can, so that you are actually showing who you are, so that you can attract more of who you are. But if you start attracting things that aren't like what you want, then that's when we have to look in the mirror and say, okay, what do we look like as an organization? We actually had that problem several years ago in my organization, as a recruiting company. We were attracting folks that just were not sticking. They weren't sticking around, and they weren't They weren't high performers. And there in some cases, we brought in folks that had performed very high in the past, but we brought them into our organization and they didn't perform. Well, what does that tell me? It wasn't the person. It was really us, the organization, that needed to be fixed. And so eventually we fixed a lot of those things. And now we have a situation where not only do we attract more folks than what we could even hire, but the ones we have want to stay, and they've been here for years and years. That's probably one of the things I'm most happy and I'm most jazzed about our company is that, our president, who I just promoted to president not long ago, she's been with us for like 6-7 years. The person who reports directly to her, she's been here like 5-6 years. The person who's like one of our main recruiters, she's been here like 7 years. Our controller. So whereas before, I'd be happy if we could keep them for a year.
Wow.
So
that tells you that you're also doing so many things as a founder and as the owner of the company, so many things right, because you're creating an environment that everybody can flourish, but also you counting on their skill set and you're letting the reins for them to do their job. You're not micromanaging. You are removing obstacles. You're checking in. You're supporting, but you're letting them to flourish. And you can't flourish in small container. A plant cannot grow deep roots in a small container. We know that, right?
That's right. And so also that has to do with putting the right people in the right seats, because the person who runs our company, her name is Leah, she does a fantastic job with doing those check-ins, communicating with her team, making sure everyone's on the same page, being collaborative, all those things that we need. Yet, do I have some of those qualities? Yes. But there's some areas, some things that she actually does it to a much greater and better degree than me when it comes to those check-ins and really connecting with the folks that work for her, making sure we don't change stuff too often. That's another problem too.
Consistency, yes. But I love the insight you just shared there, Rollis, by saying how much you're aware of that. You don't necessarily do everything the best, and somebody can do some things better. But that also shows the level of your leadership, how mature and solid, confident leader you are. Why not to let somebody else to lead with their strengths and something that really actually complement? Because on the end, you guys are all on the one winning team. You're not competing with each other. You complement it.
That's right. If she wins, I win.
And so many companies don't see that way. And you're growing bigger and more exposure and bigger brands and bigger clients that we work with, all of a sudden, too much ego, too much this, too much that, and too fast discrediting someone who just doesn't want to play the dirty play. Yeah. And that is also, way too much of history, way too much of seeing patterns that I really hope that with whoever's watching and listening to this, even as when we finish with the live, I really will highly recommend to reflect and pause and unplug for a second. I'm sure you will find yourself or somebody in the scenarios where complacency or ignorance or just getting by, was motivator. And right now we don't have that luxury. We absolutely cannot afford that luxury.
Yeah, absolutely. You just reminded me of something that I said I was going to do and I didn't do it, Izabela. So I want you to hold me accountable. One of the things that I said I was going to do, and she had suggested, I think it was Dr. Hindell. I was interviewing her, Diana Hindell. Oh, you'd love to have her on your show. I think she'd be a good guest for you. Anyway, I think it was her who told me that after each meeting, at least give yourself at the minimum, 5 minutes. If you can, 10 minutes. Between meetings, just sit and reflect on the meeting you just had. If you took an hour of your time or 45 minutes of your time, whatever the case is, with someone, you're in that space with them.
Yes.
And as soon as that's over, and this is happening right now. This is why people getting burned out right now. Hopefully someone who's watching this will help them. Is let's say I have a meeting that ends at 4:59, and I have another meeting that starts at 5 p.m., and then that one ends at 5:59, and another one starts at 6 or whatever. What happens is I had no time to process what just happened in the meeting before. So 3 meetings later, I haven't really taken any action items or anything on those meetings because I didn't have time to process it. And I'm missing the power from those meetings by doing that. So I'm saying this right here publicly, that this is something that I want to work on, because I don't think we're reflecting enough. We're like, when you and I get through with this thing, I need to sit down for at least 5 minutes and think about what we just talked about. Meditating, reflecting on it. So don't just have the conversations. Actually reflect on it for at least a few minutes afterwards while it's fresh on your mind, so you can get the most impact from it, pull the best parts of the conversation, and put it to work.
Brilliant advice and great way to actually bring things to the close, because we're going for over an hour right now, and
Oh,
I know
wow.
that we can go with so much more with this, Rollis. But what I'm also just wanted to point out, everything you share, it's a great segue and great application that we can definitely see where we fit with all of that and where we can improve. And I'm so glad to also, for you as a leader and owner of the company and enterprise that you're running, you recognizing also your weaknesses, or not necessarily weaknesses, but things that you are constantly working on. So if we guys don't have the list of those things and things that we want to get better, that is also a huge pivotal moment, because every industry, definitely specifically recruiting, because it's so touchy-feely, has tremendous way for improvement too. So do you mind just in closing, just to share and either recap or share just a few actionable items as well, again, where the people can find you, because this is such a huge, big subject. This is to be continued. We'll have a Rollis back again. But I want to make sure that audience at least can say, oh my God, all of this was fantastic, but I now have something actionable I can implement right away.
Okay, if you're in talent acquisition, the first thing that I would implore you to do is to think about the experience from your candidate's point of view and experience that yourself. That will give you more answers than what I could ever sit here and give you, because you're going to be able to see some of those things that aren't working and that just aren't serving your candidates, which means you're not going to get the best candidates. So that's one thing I would share there. If you are looking for a job and you are a candidate, try and think about things from your employer's experience. How can I make it easier for them to see me as the best choice? So think about it for like, what experience am I giving them when they look at my resume or when they try and set up an interview or whatever the case is. And then as far as just overall, I think and now I'm going to remind me of these same things myself that I'm working on, is showing more empathy, more kindness, and more patience, being more human with people. Now more than ever, we need that. And that can work in any industry, any aspect of life. The more we do that, the more we'll have positive impacts on people, because the impacts that we make on people right now, they may remember it 5, 10, 15 years from now. We want it to be good memories, not bad ones.
That is so beautiful. And one last thing, in terms of attracting the best, you have to be the best to have the best. And
Oh, that's true.
you have to amplify what the best is and what that looks like in your own environment. And more
Yes.
clear you are, the more you're going to attract exactly people like that. Right?
Exactly. You're going to attract who you are. So if you don't like what you're attracting, guess what? Start working busy on changing yourself or your organization. You'll start getting better results.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. It was absolute pleasure, Rollis. Thank you so much for spending this Thursday evening, early evening with us and sharing so many great golden nuggets. I look forward to watching your progress and everything you do. And I cannot wait to have you back again a few months down the road.
Yeah, I
Okay.
appreciate having me. Keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much. What you're doing is so valuable. I appreciate your spirit of giving and generosity with your time and your platform. So thank you for what you're doing.
Absolutely, Rollis. Thank you so much again. And I look forward to catching up with you. Stay safe and well. Okay.
You too. Stay
Take care.
healthy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.